Ms. Bell, why are you here today?
I'm here because I was on call and I was working at the traffic control center when Steve Fortenberry called in.
Ms. Bell, how long have you worked on August 18th?
Well, I had worked from my normal shift from 7 in the morning until 4 that afternoon, but then I also picked up a friend shift that evening from 4 in that afternoon until midnight.
Do you often cover shifts for coworkers?
I do when I need to.
How did working that long affect your ability to work on August 18th?
Not at all. Since I cover regularly for my friends, it's not really a big deal. It doesn't affect my performance.
Ms. Bell, how did you communicate with Mr. Fortenberry?
Well, he called in to the control center and I picked up and we communicated.
Are these conversations recorded?
Yes, they are.
How are they recorded?
Well, the computer system records it and then he puts it into a transcript.
Is there any more accurate report of your conversation with Mr. Fortenberry?
No, there's not.
Would you recognize a copy of that transcript?
Yes, I did.
Have you seen it before? Your Honor, may I approach the witness if what's been marked as Exhibit 9, showing a copy to the opposing counsel? Ms. Bell, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
And can you identify this document for the court?
This is the transcript of my communication with Steve.
All right, Your Honor, at this time the plaintiff offers Exhibit number 6 into evidence.
Without objection, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 9 submitted into evidence.
Ms. Bell, why did Mr. Fortenberry call in that night?
Well, he called in because he lost power and couldn't restart his engine.
And looking at this transcript, is this similar to the questions you ask pilots in emergency situations?
Yes, please.
What do you do when pilots call in?
We generally try to figure out where they are so we can assess the situation and figure out how to fix it.
Now, what was the first question you asked Mr. Fortenberry?
I asked about where he was.
Were you eventually able to discover where he was?
Yes, after he turned on his transponder, we were able to locate him immediately.
Was Mr. Fortenberry's altitude visible on your radar?
No.
Was his speed visible on your radar?
No, it's not.
Was he able to tell you this information?
Yes.
And what was his speed and his altitude when he called you?
He was going about, he was about 3,000 above sea level and he was going about 50 knots.
Okay. Now, Ms. Bell, were there any public airways near Mr. Fortenberry at this time?
No, there are not.
Were there any private airways near Mr. Fortenberry?
Yes, there was one private airway that we were able to find.
What was this runway called?
This was the, I cannot remember.
Do you know where this runway was located?
It was about 10 miles from where Zeke Fortenberry was.
What information did you know about this runway?
I knew they had a PAL system in the pilot activated lighting system, so Zeke would be able to activate the lights so he could land.
Why would he need a PAL system?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Your Honor, this is based on the witness's rationally based perception of the conditions that evening and the information she received from Mr. Fortenberry during their call.
All right, and what was the question? Why she needed a PAL system?
Why would Mr. Fortenberry need a PAL system?
Okay, and how's that speculated?
It's going into what was going on outside of air traffic control in the plane with Zeke Fortenberry, something even based on her communications with him she couldn't have knowledge of. They're asking her to speculate. Additionally, Your Honor, it goes to the heart of why we're here today. To say that, to go as far with a lay witness to say that Mr. Fortenberry needed those lights to land would be misleading to the jury.
Your Honor, we continue to believe that this question could be answered based on her rationally based perceptions of what she heard from Mr. Fortenberry in her own evaluation of the conditions that evening.
All right, overruled, we'll allow it.
Ms. Bell, why would Mr. Fortenberry need a PAL system?
It was a very dark night that night, and there was not much moon lighting at all, and really to land safely, Mr. Fortenberry would have needed some sort of lighting.
Ms. Bell, were you able to find any information about whether this PAL system was working?
No, there's no information on that.
Now, can you tell the jury how a pilot would turn on a PAL system? Was Mr. Fortenberry trying to turn on the lights?
Yes, he was.
During this time, was he maintaining the same altitude?
No, he was slowly losing altitude.
And during this time, while he was trying to turn on the lights, was he losing speed?
Yes, he was.
So while he was trying to turn these lights on, was this becoming an emergency situation?
It definitely was.
Ms. Bell, what was your last communication with Mr. Fortenberry?
In the last communication with Mr. Fortenberry, he said he was going to try to give it a shot to land the plane in a field nearby, but he still couldn't tell what he was really trying to do.
To your knowledge, was Mr. Fortenberry able to land?
No.
And to your knowledge, did those lights ever come on?
No.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next, further permission to publish to the jury?
Sure. All right, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor, may I please report?
Yep.
Miss Bell, you stated earlier you work for air traffic control, right? For the FAA? And you stated that part of your job as an air traffic controller is to just communicate with the pilots who call in. Okay, but before that, you were an avionics design coordinator, right? Which means your job was to help design the cockpit of a plane. So, I'm sorry, for the record, I'm gonna need you to answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, so your job was to design the cockpit of the plane.
Yes.
And that involved deciding where all the gauges and instruments would go, correct?
Correct.
And that means gauges like the fuel gauges, right?
Yes.
And part of your job was to make sure that they were easy to read, right?
Right.
Easy to see, right?
Yes.
And so, tell me, fuel gauges in a plane are pretty similar to a car. You can keep looking down at them as you're traveling, correct?
Yes.
And you can see how much fuel you have left, correct?
Correct.
So it's full, half empty, or empty, right? Pretty easy to read. And so, Ms. Bell, one moment, I beg of course indulgence, Your Honor.
Yep.
Now, Ms. Bell, you're not here today to tell me all about the design of planes. We're here to talk about the accident on August 18th, 2013, right?
Right.
Okay, so you communicated with Mr. Fortenberry on the night of August 18th, 2013.
Yes, it did.
You communicated via radio, right? And he called in because he was having an emergency, right?
Correct.
So the minute he called in, it was an emergency situation.
Well, he had no power and couldn't get his plane back on, so yes, that was an emergency situation.
So when the plaintiffs asked you earlier that it began to become an emergency situation when he got to South Fork Ranch, that wasn't completely true, was it?
Well, the emergency situation had escalated to a point where there was really nothing more that we could try to figure out. When he called in, there was still, maybe we could figure out the problem, but at that point, there was nothing more to do.
But once you learned the plane had lost power, I mean, right, Ms. Bell, there's really not a whole lot you could have done then. You did everything you could to help him, right?
Of course, I do for everyone who calls in.
And he said his emergency was the plane had lost all power, right?
Yes.
And you are aware that one way a plane loses all power is if it runs out of fuel, right?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the accident report for this crash. You reviewed that, correct? You've seen it? And so, Ms. Bell, if I showed you that accident report, you would be able to identify it. Showing opposing counsel what has been marked as Exhibit 1. Permission to approach witness.
Yep.
Ms. Bell, I am now handing you what has previously been marked as Exhibit 1 for identification. Pretty briefly, what is this?
An aircraft accident report.
For what accident?
The accident that Zeke Fortenberry got in.
Okay, and if you'll take a look at this, we're gonna go through all the pages. This is a fair and accurate copy, right? Hasn't been altered in any way. Your Honor, at this time, we offer Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so admitted.
Go ahead and flip to the page I want you to look at. One moment, Ms. Bell. prior to today's proceedings, right?
Correct.
And this is the accident report for Mr. Fortenberry's crash, right?
Yes.
Okay, and on the last page, there's a section 2.2 that lists out probable causes, correct?
Yes.
And it says the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable causes of this accident are, and then it lists 6 probable causes, correct?
It does.
Well, the very first probable cause is that the aircraft lost engine power due to insufficient fuel. Isn't that right?
That's what it says.
So the airplane ran out of fuel. That's one of the probable causes.
Objection, Your Honor, improper opinion. She's not an expert and cannot testify or cannot interpret this report.
All right, what do you say about that?
Your Honor, this is a lay witness. Any witness could answer this question. And she's already gone into knowledge of how loss of fuel can cause loss of power in a plane.
All right, yeah, overruled.
The first probable cause is that the aircraft lost engine power due to insufficient fuel, which means, in layman's terms, the plane ran out of fuel.
Correct.
Okay, and then the second probable cause is given the intended flight distance, weather conditions, and fuel capacity of the aircraft, the pilot did not have sufficient fuel to reach his intended destination and continue flight for 45 minutes. Isn't that correct?
It does say that.
All right, you can sit that down. Thank you, Ms. Bell. Now, you said that your conversation with Mr. Fortenberry that night was recorded, correct?
It was.
And all conversations, any communications that come into air traffic control, there's an audio recording, right? But this conversation was actually transcribed to paper, isn't that right?
It was.
And you're familiar with that transcription because you saw it just moments ago, correct?
Right.
Okay, I'd actually like to review that with you. Again, permission to approach the witness, Your Honor, with Exhibit 9 that's already been entered into evidence.
Yep.
Just one moment, Ms. Bell. Now, if you could tell me, based on this transcript, you asked several questions of Mr. Fortenberry, right?
I did.
You wanted to assess the emergency situation, correct?
Correct.
Now, where in this transcript do you ask Mr. Fortenberry about fuel?
Never.
Where in here does he mention fuel?
We were trying to figure out where he should land. We weren't worried about the cause at the moment. We were just needed to get him to safety.
Okay, but nowhere in here does it say that he talked about fuel.
No, because we didn't.
So it's your testimony that you and Mr. Fortenberry never talked about fuel whatsoever?
In this transcription, which is the most accurate version of our conversation, yes, that's true.
But it's your testimony that you never spoke about that, period? One moment. Ms. Bell, you remember giving a sworn statement to the court, do you not?
I do.
Prior to today, correct? And if I showed you that statement, you'd recognize it.
I would.
Permission to approach?
Yep.
All right, Ms. Bell, this is your deposition, your sworn statement that you gave to the court on November 19th, 2014. And I got those papers, your signature, so let's go with this. And this is your signature, correct?
Correct.
You signed this document saying that you gave all the facts and told the truth, correct? Now, do you remember stating in your deposition that you asked Mr. Fortenberry how much fuel was in his plane?
I do. The deposition was taken so long after the event, though, that some of my recollections were a little muddled about it, and there's certain things that I didn't say as accurately as are portrayed in the transcription, which is the most accurate version of what happened that night.
But according to your deposition, you asked him about fuel.
Right.
And according to your deposition, he was evasive and would never really answer.
Well, yes, but in the actual transcription, which is more accurate,
I know.
we never had this conversation.
But let's talk about your deposition.
Objection, Your Honor, if opposing counsel could please allow my witness to finish her answer.
All right, yeah, let's make
Yes,
sure she's the answer.
But in your deposition, Ms. Bell, he was evasive and would never really respond to your questions about fuel.
Well, yes, but that's not accurately what happened that night, so he never actually was evasive about that, because the transcription, which is a recorded conversation,
to that in a minute, but you asked him about fuel according to your deposition.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay?
All right, what's your response?
Your Honor, it is not hearsay. Yes, it was an out-of-court statement, and it's offered for the truth of the matter asserted. But this has already been gone into. I am impeaching the witness. She stated that she never asked him about fuel, yet in her deposition, it says that she did. Very blatantly, that they had a conversation about fuel. I'm impeaching the witness and allowed to go into this testimony at this time. It's an exception to hearsay.
All right, I'm gonna overrule it. We can move on with it.
You asked him about fuel according to your deposition, yes.
Yes.
And he was evasive, yes.
Objection, Your Honor, this is hearsay.
Overrule.
He was evasive, yes.
In the deposition, yes.
And he actually said a friend of his fueled the plane for him, right?
Correct.
Okay, and you remember when you gave that deposition, you swore to tell the truth, correct?
I did.
And you swore to correct any discrepancies or inaccuracies.
To the best that I could at the time, which was very long after the accident happened.
Well, yes, I understand that, Miss Bell, but correct me if I'm wrong, you talked about the conversation with fuel in your deposition, and then before it ended, you were handed the transcript and asked to review it.
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. So, give me just a minute. This is going to take a couple different pages. All right, and then. Miss Bell. Commissioner Roach. On page 17, or on page 4 of your deposition, it says, I asked him what his fuel gauges were showing. On a plane like that, there should be 2 fuel gauges, one for the right tank and one for the left. Isn't that right?
It does say that.
Okay, and then on page 6, which follows page 4, correct?
Correct.
That is where they ask you to review the transcript. Maybe it's page 7. Yes, page 7. They ask you to review the transcript, and you did say that it was a true and correct copy. Isn't that right?
I do.
But then they ask you, have you told us everything that you know or possibly could know or may claim to know later about this event? And you said yes, right?
I did.
So you didn't correct the inaccuracy about the fuel statement before.
Yes, I did.
So this discrepancy that you're saying exists, the first time we're hearing about this is in court today, right?
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Bell. I have a few more questions for you. Yeah, actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said earlier that lack of fuel is one cause of a plane losing all power.
Well, yes.
And the reason for the emergency landing was Mr. Fortenberry's plane that lost all power.
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Bell, what is the most accurate report of your conversation with Mr. Fortenberry?
The transcript of communication.
Why is that transcript different from your deposition?
Well, that was the complete transcript of exactly what we said that night, not my recollection from a year later.
Now, Miss Bell, do you still have that NTSB report in front of you?
Yes.
Now, if you would look with me on the last page, I believe, under probable causes, we looked at this with opposing counsel. Could you please read for the court cause number 5?
The pilot was not directed to another nearby private airfield, specifically Stinson Ranch Field, which is 10 miles from South Fork Ranch Airfield on the heading of 270 degrees from that field.
Thank you, Miss Bell. And now, could you read number 4 for the court?
The PAL system on South Fork Ranch was not in operational condition at the time of the crash.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor. Permission to place evidence